It was a pleasure to be invited back to Google. And I love the ferment here, the sense that everything is an experiment, because certainly in the realms that we're all in, everything henceforth is an experiment. When I'm going to be teaching with students at Pace University, it's all going to be co-learning, because, you know, what am I going to teach them about something I don't understand? Except I understand that the value of experimentation, and I'll get to this in a second, the value of getting out of the nerd loop, as Randy Olson, my friend and the author of Don't Be Such a Scientist, wrote not long ago. The nerd loop, this is not the nerd loop. I'm excited about what I see here. The nerd loop is everybody just talking to each other about how to talk instead of just getting out in the world and actually experimenting. So conveying the climate story, I'm going to try to race through this because it has been a long day. And hopefully the content will be somewhat engaging despite that. And the great news about climate is climate matters. You know, people care about the seasons, the issues that confront us every day in the news headlines related to climate change. It mattered in Russia, it mattered in Pakistan, and of course it mattered in Joplin, Missouri. The patterns of extreme weather particularly are enormously important to people. And energy matters. What that is on the side there is I recently toured the Indian Point nuclear power plant, and I was inside the building where they have the spent fuel. You're looking at the spent fuel storage there. And there's a much longer version of this video I have yet to try to edit and put online. But by going into Indian Point, you know, the belly of the beast, right during the Fukushima issue, I was really looking carefully at how our understanding of nuclear power is changing. Advocates who once hated the idea of storing nuclear waste on site now are looking at dry casks as a really, you know, reasonable alternative, certainly to this. And, you know, trying to convey that story in a way that gets past these blockades like no nukes or no fracking, and trying to get real about it. You know, even if you turned off Indian Point tomorrow, it will be there for decades. So there, you know, no new nukes is a separate question from no nukes at all. So what I try to do on my blog every day and in my broader writing is to clarify, you know, what are we talking about? Are we really talking about no nukes? Or are we talking about no new nukes? So the idea is to get inside the story, to kind of convey it in fresh ways, and also to break down some of the barriers that have us so polarized over these issues that matter. And energy, of course, matters too. 2 or 3 billion people around the planet have no access to any kind of electrical grid. They cook on fuels that cause them premature mortality and morbidity every day. Rajendra Pachauri sent me this picture years ago to illustrate what the consequences are of indoor cooking with no vented stove. But we're all kind of feeling like this guy. This was a television reporter in Copenhagen in 2009. At the very end of that meeting, when we were all like, oh my God, this is a room with like 3,000 journalists. My friend John Broder, who's covered many, many presidential campaigns, said he had never been at all the conventions. He'd never been in a room with so many journalists in such a sort of horrific, nightmarish situation. So we're all feeling a little bit like this right now. And whatever your role is in this climate question, and there are ways forward, and I'm convinced that the web, despite the bubble pop mode of how information tends to flow, and despite the power it gives to small components of the discourse to dominate the discourse, I still think in the end it will give great opportunities to move forward. And the reason this guy is looking like this is because you've probably heard about wicked problems as a category problem that have many dimensions. They're all interrelated, and there's no simple way to dissect it. Well, some people, Kelly Levin, I think she was going to be here. Oh, you're here, duh, right. It's been a long day. She wrote this paper, co-wrote a paper in 2007 on the super wicked climate problem, and it's easy to Google for. There's nothing easier to Google for than super wicked and climate. That really laid out a category, some of the aspects of this problem that make it nearly insoluble. And then I wrote a piece not long ago about, I spoke at a meeting at Yale and about that really this is beyond super wicked. And the reason there is, despite that piece focused mostly, your paper focused mainly on the sort of diplomatic issues and the equity issues and how do you measure a ton, but that it didn't really dive into the cognitive issues. And this is what I called in a blog post a couple of years ago, an inconvenient mind, meaning when you really look at the climate problem, a big chunk of it is in here, not out there. It's all those things you heard today, the finite basket of worry, the confirmation bias, single action bias. So I dove, after 20 years of writing about global warming as a biogeophysical problem with some technical solution questions, or economic ones, I realized that the cognitive stuff is the dominant issue. But even there, I think communication gives us opportunities to move forward constructively. And of course, the other super wicked nature of this thing is that the climate problem isn't the problem. Not at all. It's the symptom. The symptom is of this super wicked thing, our growth spurt in the last 200 years. It's just a stunning thing. For many species, this is a one-time event. You know, it's like when, when Aborigines got to Australia 40,000 years ago, boom, you know, they took away all those megafauna, and there's this amazing thing that happens when a species kind of develops a capacity to move into new environments, and we explosively grew. And now the question is, to my mind, and I've written this a few times, we're kind of like this. This is a bacteria on a petri dish. And so we've been kind of in bacteria mode. And the question is, and this is what's really challenging, we now, unlike bacteria in a new rich environment, we've been told there's an edge to our petri dish like this. And how do we integrate that knowledge? And we're a very young species with a very young mind, with all these layers, the primitive brain and all these aspects to our brain that don't fit well with this kind of message. And so, and this is London. I kind of like to look at bacteria on agar, and then look at Don Pettit's satellite view of a city. And you could look at that, and many people have written about cities as being sort of, or the human imprint on the planet as being cancerous, like a malignant tumor. And there have been papers about this, the relationship between how we're growing and how cancer grows. Of course, cities are probably our salvation in the end. Concentrating our communities, using resources more efficiently, as you do in cities, advancing progress faster. People move to cities, they have more access to healthcare and schools. So it looks kind of just like agar, but I think it illustrates the potential for us to do wonderful things. Don Pettit, of course, and I think another thing this illustrates is the power of imagery. Don Pettit is one of the cool, I guess I've gotten to know like 4 astronauts, which is really one of the great things about being a science writer. You get to meet cool people. And Don Pettit is like the ultimate guy. He went to Antarctica searching for meteorites in the ice, and he made an ice didgeridoo for no particular reason. He was on the space station for 6 months, so he took glorious photographs of the Earth. He did an amazing video compilation of photos from space of the Aurora Borealis. I blogged on that. If you search for Aurora Borealis and Revkin, you'll find this stunning video that gives you a very special view of our planet. And he didn't have to do that. He could, although actually NASA encourages that. It's the only agency that in its charter says thou shalt communicate thine findings. 1958, whatever it was called, the Space Act. So NASA is a very special place, and it has a culture of communication. Now, but scientists overall, getting back to the edge of the petri dish, scientists essentially, like Martin Parry there in 2007 at the rollout of the grand IPCC report, which, as I said earlier, unfortunately is done as kind of the handing down of knowledge from the great on high. Here it is, this perfect body of knowledge about climate. And it's like the chiding parent. Remember in Rebel Without a Cause, when there's a great scene when Mr. Magoo, what's his name, the actor, Backus, Jim Backus is trying to get his son to avoid going out and being reckless and dying young. And the son doesn't want to hear anything about it. We're basically, the scientists for the last 20 years telling us there are global limits are kind of like Jim Backus telling James Dean, son, if you don't change your ways. And they don't kind of understand, it seems so far. There hasn't, maybe because the physical scientists have been the main storytellers so far, they haven't really absorbed the reality that teenagers don't listen to grown-ups very much. So you want to create a safe space for them to work out their problems before they mature. So, and then there's these other problems that lead to this bollocks that we're in. One, of course, is that way back in the 20th century, pollution was easy. It was really easy. It was in your face. It was in your nose, in your lungs. It stung your eyes. The Hudson River, I just yesterday was at the Strawberry Festival there with Pete Seeger, celebrating the rebirth of this river and the waterfronts along it. But 50 years ago, there was crap flowing by. People I interviewed in the mid-90s for a story on the revival of the Hudson said when they were kids, they had a special swimming stroke in the Hudson River, which is like this, to clear all the debris as you're swimming. So here, the atmosphere, you could kind of, in the early 70s, the late 60s, you could look at this and say, we need to clean this up. There was bipartisanship There was, remember, a Republican president, Richard Nixon, gave an amazing State of the Union address with a section on the environment that's worth reviewing now. And the EPA was created under Nixon. And we kind of got busy. The Clean Air Act actually kind of cleaned the air. There's still problems, of course. And the Clean Water Act worked. The Sewage Bond Acts, we got going. But it was all because it was right there. It was in your face. It was a now thing and a here thing. And unfortunately, CO2 is not like that, as you all know. So I did a post a couple of years ago where I said, well, suppose CO2 were pink. Like if the atmosphere was pinkifying slowly over time, with that building sense of something changing, would that change us? But then, of course, I talked to cognitive scientists about this thing, and they said, well, the rate of pinkification is so slow that even that wouldn't really get us where you need to go, because there's the shifting baselines. Robert Brulle, B-R-U-L-L-E, at Drexel University, has really done a big body of work on how we become inured. We basically grow up with the environment that's around us. Our kids right now are growing up with the norm for the Arctic being that it's melting and polar bears are having a hard time. When I was a kid, my son's age, I had these books that my dad had about Admiral Peary going to the North Pole, this forbidding, frozen, ice-locked place. So for me, it's like a lot of things going on. For my sons, it's like, oh, yeah, polar bears are having a hard time. You know? So it's like, how do you kind of move forward with that? And our response, I kind of love this interaction. Some of you, if you've heard me before, have probably heard me talk about this. This was the Supreme Court argument over whether CO2 should be regulated as a pollutant. And here we had James Milky, who was representing the state of Massachusetts and the other parties trying to get this to happen. And there was this technical question that came up about the troposphere, and Justice Scalia, you know, had to be kind of corrected about something he said. Respectfully, Your Honor, it's not the stratosphere, it's the troposphere. Justice Scalia says, troposphere, whatever. I told you before, I'm not a scientist. Laughter. That's why I don't want to have to deal with global warming, to tell you the truth. Now, you could look at that and say, oh, he's just some conservative Supreme Court justice. But I think some chunk of us, societally, globally, actually, even the data when you look at Chinese attitudes, is we don't want to deal with this for many, many different reasons, all of which make it beyond super wicked. So this is the down part. I'm taking you down, right? And then, of course, you know, as you know, there's a lot of people out there who figured out a long time ago that there's ways to game the system. And the system is so set up for stasis. It's not like people who want to maintain the status quo on fossil fuels have a lot of work to do. We like fossil fuels. I live in a house that's heated by oil. I drive a Prius and a minivan. You know, when they make a hybrid minivan, I'd love to buy one, but they haven't done that yet. So, you know, we basically, our society is still a fossil-fueled phenomenon, and so maintaining that is really easy. Changing that is really hard. So any idea that it almost didn't matter who was spending a little bit more money, you've probably heard that debate recently, because it's not like they had the same task. One task is enormous, and the other task is really simple. And so in the Times for years, we were writing about industry's efforts to, you know, foment doubt. You know, how hard is that? And then, of course, around that time as well, I got some documents from a helpful public servant that showed that the Bush administration had industry people in it who were actually editing words to change the nature of scientific reports being produced by the government on global warming. And here was this great line that they cut out because it was because it was too speculative. And the line was, warming will also cause reductions in mountain glaciers. So opening your refrigerator door will make the food warm up is too speculative. Yeah, you know, and that all was like, you know, aggravating, and it was great for me to reveal it. It was a very traditional journalistic process, and people basically had to quit the White House, and felt all really good. And here Jim Hansen was being muzzled, and I unmuzzled him. And he unmuzzled. He never was muzzled. The bottom line there, but that all feels like, well, if we could just get rid of all of that stuff, then magically we'd move forward on global warming and on making this issue, addressing it. What I've learned more recently, again, is unfortunately that's not the case. It's not that simple. And then on the other side, my strong sense is many very well-meaning scientists and environmental groups and campaigners for action on energy got so. This gets to what someone, maybe it was Chris Field, said earlier today about the need to fight fire with fire. You know, people were pushing, distorting, overstating, so you had to be as loud as they were and as aggressive as they were. So one of the environmental groups came up with this picture of a drowning polar bear that went all around the web, and caught a lot of people's attention. The problem is the skeptics immediately noted correctly that the reason the polar bear was floundering and looking really upset was because the helicopter the photographer was in was about 30 feet overhead, buffeting him with the winds. Look at that picture. He's like, what the, you know? So did that accomplish anything? It maybe, you know, it got 3 people worried about polar bears more than they might have been, and it created ammunition for naysayers. And even institutions as well-meaning and I think overall really constructive, the National Science Foundation in 2008, there was this big paper in Nature or Science, Alan Pound's paper on the frogs' extinctions being the sort of the indicator of global warming. And the press release, warmer temperatures, enhanced growth conditions of fatal fungus, climate change drives widespread amphibian extinctions. And it was very definitive and all the nuance was out, and it turned out, even then, it was highly contentious. Herpetologists and climatologists were having this big fight over what was causing the die-off of these frogs. It was the chytrid fungus, or was it warm temperatures in Costa Rica? And the fungal people have won out that battle now. But even then, it was much more nuanced than the way it was being conveyed. And you know, I tried to write that in a nuanced way. As a result, my story ended up buried inside the New York Times. And another story in another major paper was a front-page piece, Global Warming Claims First Victims. And those tendencies, they feel so, you know, great, and everyone accomplishes the thing, and the complexity then emerges, and that again fuels those who have that really easy task of saying they're overstating or whatever. So it's a really challenging situation. Now the other reality is, and this is interesting to me, every time there's a momentous weather event, you get this sense of, you know, this is global warming because we're all kind of focused on this right now. This was 1927 flood in Vermont in November from a late season tropical storm, epic flood, and it scoured all the valleys there, and it laid down this layer of gravel in the beds of all the lakes around southern Vermont. And 3 or 4 researchers in 2002 did a lot of lake bed coring around the Northeast in New York and Vermont and elsewhere, and found that layer from this epic flood, the flood of record for the Northeast, they've never experienced one as bad as this ever. In the paleo record of lake bed sediments, there are layers of gravel that are 10 times thicker than the one from the flood that we think of as the most epic flood in the history of New England. So there's this, we have to realize that we have to kind of, I think, be, you know, as honest as possible about what's known, not known, about the extent of climate extremes in the normal world, and the extent that human influences may transform, make things worse, or maybe in other places not make things worse. We don't really, you know, it's important to be honest and clear about the nature of those issues. Oh, and here too, this was another example where there was a letter published in Science from a couple hundred National Academy of Sciences members expressing deep concern about global warming and pushing back against ClimateGate. And an art director, unbeknownst to the authors of the letter, chose this image to illustrate. The image was almost, I think, as large as the letter. It was like half of a page in the journal Science. And it took like a nanosecond for some skeptic to Google, just to search back through the credit on the photo to the photo agency to determine that this was actually not even a photograph. It was called a photo illustration. It's 3 different photos, a photo of a bear, a photo of an ice floe, and a photo of open water. And that ended up being kind of the story instead of the letter. So details matter, unfortunately. So here we are, you know, you've got this wacky landscape now of, there was a time when this all, let me see, oh yeah, there was a time when things were oh so easy. Back in the 20th century, we had pollution that we could understand, and we had avuncular men, mostly, who every evening would tell us with that comforting assurance that that's the way it is, Tuesday, November 9th, 1969. And we all dined on this kind of common intellectual mac and cheese comfort food every night. And we had that sense of a common issue, a common story. And now, of course, with the web, on any issue just about, but certainly on climate, we're all dining on comfort food still. But now it's like the world's biggest buffet. It's like a Google cafeteria. I'll have the sushi. No, I'll have the pizza. And so everybody with an ideological predisposition goes out there and finds the stuff that fits their predisposition. So you think, oh man, but think about this though, which is better in the long run? This, where there was oversimplification, gross oversimplification sometimes, and I'm not just talking about CBS News. The New York Times front page was a very similar sense of a handoff. We know something, here it is, goodbye. And this is a more dynamic ecosystem. I think despite the problems that have come with this, I think in the long run, as I said earlier, I think it holds some real promise to make progress. And still though, right, for the moment, it still locks us for the most part in our discourse on these issues in a kind of a batting, a fight between the loudest voices, and you end up with that torquing toward oversimplification and toward kind of trying to get the message across in ways that are framed largely politically. And I think it's really unfortunate. It's been kind of a sad thing to watch. This is so funny. I didn't turn off Twitter. Elizabeth Rosenthal, one of the best reporters at the New York Times, just came on Skype.
McKinnon's offline.
Oh, you saw that earlier? I could Skype them in right now. Yeah, and by the way, I did a piece in 2006 called Yelling Fire on a Hot Planet, which I encourage you to Google for as well, which laid out in 2006 some of the issues that have come. And I'm not going to say that I was forecasting correctly, but I'll just say that there were issues looming then that have played out since then that are worth reviewing. So where do we go from here? Here's where I think there's real prospects for good stuff to happen. As Randy Olson said, we do have to get out of the nerd loop. And if you Google for that phrase, you'll find his epic essay on this or my blog post. And there's ways forward. The thing called journalism that I still am partly involved with is, as I say many times, is a fast shrinking wedge of this explosively growing pie of communications options. So the idea that an institution, a university, a company was just going to put out a press release and wait for a reporter to call, that's so 20th century. And you could say that's a real problem if you're locked into the old mode of how ideas move and get shaped and how progress gets made. There are ways forward. One was a couple of years ago on .earth, this scientist, Andy Bunn, anyone know him? Western Washington University, paleoclimate guy. Anyway, he was going to Siberia with a bunch of students and other researchers to do a float down one of those amazing Siberian rivers and do paleoclimate work along the way. Do I want to come? And I was like, well, even if I could afford to, the little grainy things in the image there are the bugs. They're not. Remember, there's no dust on the negative anymore. I didn't really want to go to Siberia, although actually I would love to go to see the crater particularly. Anyway, so I said, well, you're going. You have like a camera and some audio gear. Can you record some of your impressions of what's going on? Take a bunch of pictures, send them to me, and I'll curate. I'll put together a story, not really a story, a report from the field, a postcard, as we call it, from the Pleistocene, from your work. And it was kind of a collaborative thing. It was a new thing. It's not journalism. It's not public relations. It's just communication. It's a scientist sending me stuff to work with long distance. And I think it was enough of a success that we now have a blog in the science section called Scientist at Work, which is basically made this a model for an ongoing blog. A bunch of universities have done this now. The American Geophysical Union has a cluster of science blogs. This is great stuff that's happening. Getting it seen is the next question, which relates to what you heard from a lot of the Googlers earlier today about searchability and all that stuff. And we're all still learning on that front. And then there's all kinds of ways to tell stories. Richard Alley, Penn State, an amazing scientist. He helped drill those cores in the Greenland ice sheet and reveal abrupt change. And he's been a lead author in the IPCC reports. And he sings. I'm not going to play his songs. He does this Johnny Cash thing that's, well, it's an acquired taste, but it's wonderful. He's also a Republican, as he told me recently. So that gets back to what someone else was saying earlier. Collect him if you're collecting Republicans. But he's experimenting. He's definitely outside the nerd loop. And I did another video. If you Google for singing climatologist, and you'll find the YouTube video of him doing this. And for dancing climatologist, to see his dance in which he illustrates the Milankovitch cycle of ice ages by doing like davening. And his bald spot is the North Pole, and his nose is the equator. And he talks about 40,000 years. It's fantastic stuff to watch. And he's out there pushing the limits. Not everybody's going to be him. And one of the big challenges, of course, as young scientists, it's easier for him with tenure and an established career to kind of be goofy. But it's not so easy if you're a young emerging researcher to be goofy. So finding ways to experiment, but having institutions that encourage that and are willing to put up with some failure once in a while is really important. So here's the other reason I'm excited about the web, which is, of course, that, as you heard lots of instances of this today, you have the ability to show, not just show, but demonstrate using every kind of medium except maybe smell. You can kind of tell the story with whatever tool is best. So if you wanted to talk about the volume of the atmosphere at sea level pressure, you could say, well, you could say it in words like we had that exercise before, or you could say it in pictures like that one. That's what the atmosphere, that's the full volume of the atmosphere if all the air were at sea level pressure, and if it's put in a volume of a sphere. It's small, you know, and there have been other experiments. Al Gore did the varnish on the globe, and I'm not saying this is better than the varnish on the globe. I'm just saying it's an interesting experiment. Adam Neiman, who created this in 2003, his British science illustrator, I think his work is really valuable. I'm going to show you another example in a second. So I spoke at Rutgers not long ago, and they have this cool clicker thing. Any of you teach in a school where you can click? Very interesting. So you're engaging the students in questions. I asked them this question. If all the world's liquid water was shown as a spherical volume, how big would it be compared to the planet? Big enough to obscure the US on the globe? South America? Hide the northeastern states? Texas? Any votes? You're pretty close. So that's all the liquid water over there, that little green bubble. That's all the oceans. You know, remember the oceans? I sailed across the Indian Ocean once, and it seems limitless. It's 2.5 miles deep. My God! And I was 1,000 miles from land almost in every direction at one point on that trip, and it's just like infinity incarnate. But then when you realize 2 miles deep, okay, this many square miles, this many cubic miles, and you realize that actually it's pretty small. So again, this work is a valuable. Can you imagine if every kid's geography or geology textbook starts with this image? And it would, I think it could create a fundamentally new way of conveying in a non-judgmental way. There's nothing about that image that says, oh, you know, something scary or weird. It's just a new way of visualizing information. That's, you know what? Hold on. I thought I had turned that off, but I'll have to turn it off now. Pause everything for a second. Let's see who we could say hi to. Rusty Schweickart, an astronaut, is on all the time. He's a great guy. So, all right, here we go, back. And then there's this other stuff, you know, cognitive, the biology, the biochemistry of the brain is revealing all kinds of things. That seeing, this is NIH work, seeing words is different than hearing words, is different than thinking about words. And so that says you can feed all of those processes at once, depending on how you tell your story. And so I'm glad that when I went to the North Pole in 2003, I didn't just go with a pad.
You can feel the chunk that we're on actually starting to fail a bit more. Probably hairline cracks up towards the helos there.
So does that mean we should back up?
Oh, not yet. You can always jump over a crack.
Remember, this is a 2-mile deep ocean also. And that noise you hear in the background, that's not a truck or a helicopter, that's the ice. The ice is moving 400 yards an hour, and these big floes are kind of crunching into each other. And right near our camp, the helicopters are parked right near this ridge. And so am I going to just go to the North Pole and tell that story in text and maybe even a photo? No. Why would I do that? Listen to this.
The power is just, it's unstoppable. There's no mechanical system you could really design to live through a thing like this. The forces are just stunning. And that's the risk. That's the risk we take.
And I grabbed, listen to this, the noises are unreal. I didn't have any video training when I went there. I just grabbed one of our cameras. The Times was getting involved in documentary and doing film at that time. I grabbed 2 cameras, a bunch of battery packs, and just practiced for a day and went. So again, having that, you know, making sure you're going to tell the story with the means that makes the story most meaningful is very important to me. And I've been trying ever since then. It was really that trip that pushed me more and more into multimedia. Now here's another thing you can do with imagery. You can make the invisible visible. Remember the pinkification issue? I'm just going to back up so you see this again. What I'm about to show you is a video using an infrared camera of leaks from natural gas, from methane. The methane, that's the main constituent of natural gas, is is basically opaque to infrared radiation. It's a greenhouse gas, remember? Infrared, the heat stuff doesn't go through it. So when you have leaks in pipelines, in fact, I don't understand why no one has gone around fracking country with an infrared camera just to show, this is what this is an oil tank in Colorado. That's what it looks like on a bright sunny day in Colorado, and then it'll start again. This is what it looks like with an infrared camera. So if that were visible, you can be sure that communities in that area would be going, what the, they're driving down the highway and thinking that the oil tank is on fire. It's just, this is leakage of a commodity. It's the only greenhouse gas that's a commodity now. Why in the world would you have it flowing freely into the atmosphere where it becomes a powerful greenhouse gas? So again, finding those ways to tell the story, even as reporters, I don't understand why this isn't being used more. We did a page 1 piece about methane, about companies that were doing the right thing, the best practices people that you don't hear about much, who were stanching these leaks actively and making money doing it. Now here's another way of visualizing the invisible. Too much of the discourse around issues like climate, and global warming, this came up today as well. I think the divisions over this issue very often are because people haven't actually defined what they're talking about. And years ago, I started thinking about the shape of an idea. How can you kind of convey the maturity, the level of confidence in an idea in a different way? There's been all kinds of experiments along the lines. So I thought, well, just in terms of a bell curve, and there's all kinds of problems with this, but so here's an experiment. More CO2, warmer world is a very sharply delineated curve with very small tails, if any. There always will be some people out there who say, no, greenhouse CO2 really doesn't work. And, they're not really a serious part of the discourse. But even Michael Crichton agreed that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. More of it will make the world warmer. He just had issues about the rate and how dangerous that was. Now, here's where things get sticky. The things that matter most to people aren't that, more CO2 makes the world warmer. The things that matter most to people are, what's it going to do to sea level? How fast? What's it going to do to hurricanes, extreme events? And one of the biggest unresolved questions is the sensitivity of the climate system to a big increase in CO2. That's still pretty much a flat line. Warming from doubled CO2, it's between 3 and 8 degrees, some 1.5, 4.5, with a higher probability but it's a big range, and it's been like that for 30 plus years. So making sure that we understand there's some aspects of this issue that where there really is real debate, and virtually no chance that one, you're not going to see that curve change. Probably in my lifetime. Maybe someone will have a breakthrough, but I don't see any evidence of a learning curve there. In fact, on some of these, you get what's called negative learning. The more we study hurricanes, the more nuanced the picture has become of what hurricanes will do in a warming world. And so you can have curves. I think it's just helpful to start to discuss when you're having someone comes up to you and says, I don't believe in global warming. My first question always is, let's talk, not, get out my iPhone. Well, I have a Droid. Yeah, I'm an Android person. So it's helpful to sort of say, well, what is it you disagree with? And quite often, of course, it's not even about the science, it's about the policy. What do we do about it? And there you get into this reality, and this is, again, this very sobering work on the psychology and the sociology tells you some important things. And I'm going to try to speed to a conclusion here so we have time for some questions. I did this piece a few months ago when I started to dive in more deeply on the work of Dan Kahan, K-A-H-A-N, at Yale. He's at the law school, but he runs this thing called culturalcognition.net. It's an ongoing research project looking at why people hold the beliefs that they do. And it's extremely important work right now because it basically illustrates vividly with experimentation, with empirical work that information doesn't matter quite often. That the way information is presented, the person presenting the information, if it comes through a trusted friend, if it's an article and they've done this thing where they'll make a mock Newsweek story about global warming, and they'll have a picture of a guy with a string tie or whatever and a pocket protector, or a picture of someone in Birkenstocks and flannel, and the perceptions, the reaction of the person reading the piece are very significantly determined by the context. Is it someone who looks like their kind of person, that kind of thing. Very important work. And so I did this piece when I realized you could actually go out there, depending on your predisposition, you could find a Nobel Prize winning physicist, not just a Nobel Prize winner, but a Nobel Prize winning physicist who probably matches your view of global warming. There's Burton Richter, who wrote a really good book about energy and innovation, and strongly feels that we need to get busy on decarbonizing the energy system. There's Ivar Gaever up here from Rensselaer, emeritus now, who was so enraged when the American Physical Society or some group called global warming incontrovertible. That set him off. It made his head explode. And he said only religious beliefs are incontrovertible. And Laughlin, and then of course Steve Chu. Again, they all reflect kind of the broad range of how we all feel about these issues. So that says to me, you know, even if you're really smart, even if you know basic physics, you're not going to find a lot of, it doesn't mean that's the thing that matters. Now, energy, the energy story is a very different story than the climate story. And this leads to another, I think, significant opportunity. The Six Americas, I'm sure many of you know about this ongoing study by Tony Lasarowitz and others, based at Yale primarily, where they basically looked at people and done very deep surveys of how we what we think about global warming and these related issues, and what correlations there are with other things. And here, there are basically six Americas they've come out with. There's dismissives, doubtfuls, disengaged, cautious, concerned, and alarmed. This was the older data set. This was from 2000. This was a survey in late 2008 and released in 2009. This was the big question here was support for cap and trade. So this was, to me, anyone who thought that somehow we lost the cap and trade fight more recently wasn't paying attention to Tony Lasarowitz's work at the end of 2008, 2009, because this says to me right away, this is never going to happen. If you have people who are alarmed about global warming, barely nudging above the midline on whether they support a cap and trade bill, then what's with that? It says to me that that's not going to happen. Now here, support for providing rebates for purchases of solar panels and fuel-efficient vehicles. Now look at that. Even the dismissives are at the midline. Now, the economists I show this to say, oh yeah, but that's just because one is taking away money and one is giving away money. You know, it's a give back, it's a benefit, but it's not that simple. Here, support for requiring automakers to increase fuel efficiency to 45 miles a gallon. That's a big mandate. That's not giving away money. Those cars are going to cost more. They're going to impede your freedom to have your big vehicle. But even there, the dismissives are almost at the midline. So what does that say to me? You know, climate, fight the climate, constrain those greenhouse gases or support energy innovation. It says to me that there was a lot of wasted effort for a long time that, and again, partially I think because people weren't paying attention to a lot of this work. The work of people like Matt Nisbet and Lasarowitz and Kahane and others is really valuable, and especially studies like this that are an ongoing project. The bubbles have changed shape. This one got bigger recently after ClimateGate. Now they're kind of modulating. I have thoughts about that as well. Now, one thing I'm just going to throw in just because I care about it a lot, another image. This is my close encounters of the third kind. You know, the mud pile that all those people had in their head. They were thinking the aliens were coming. Well, my vision, my visual mantra is this. This is my This shows me that we had all this talk about this, even the stimulus package. You know, we're now engaged on the energy quest. But you look at this. This is 50 years of scientific inquiry in America. Sputnik at the left, oh my God, the Russians got into space. So yellow is the space race. We had a space race. It was several tens of billions a year in constant dollars, and we got to the moon, and we accomplished a lot of stuff, and it changed the economy in many ways. And then we started the war on cancer. That's the blue at the top, and that got up to about 35, 40 billion a year in constant dollars. And then look at the energy, though. Energy is green. That little green ribbon that looks like an anaconda that swallowed a tennis ball is our interest in energy. And notice, everyone blames Ronald Reagan for unplugging the solar program. And yes, he did. But then look, who plugged it back in? Republicans, Democrats came and went. And we were like, as I've said, we're in a bipartisan slumber party on energy innovation in this country. And the little blip of the stimulus package is meaningless in the long run, especially because it's over. It's already over. And you talk to anybody in that arena, and they'll tell you that, if you want a young person to get engaged and excited about building a career in this arena, what you need is sustained support, not this kind of thing. I'm going to fly forward here. So again, and I did a post on this a while ago. If I had a choice between two bumper stickers for my Prius, And one was fight the climate crisis, the other was join the energy quest. And I know they're both wonky, but look, we're wonks, okay? You know, that's what we are. I would choose energy quest. And there's another reason I would do that, and it relates to the global side of this issue. There are, again, to me, the energy challenge the world faces is a halvesies thing. The rich half is how do we use it more efficiently, and how do we get the carbon out of our energy norms. The poor half is that there's nearly 3 billion people on the planet who have no energy options that are reasonable. And there are kids who have to do their homework in Guinea by going out of their slums where there's no electricity to the parking lot at the airport, where there's street lights. And this picture to me represents like a triple scandal. These are kids who want to become part of the innovative, educated, progressive life on the planet Earth that every human aspires to, and they have to migrate like moths to streetlights to do their homework. And there's no reason that needs to be part of our landscape right now. I was just at a meeting in Toronto looking for ways to fast forward energy access through 2030, and it's just as vital by far to me as the climate challenge. And there's great promise both through IT and ET, electrical technology. This was Libby Rosenthal, whose little Skype thing you saw a minute ago. She went to Kenya, rural Kenya, in December to a village where a woman was tired of having to go into town to charge her cell phone at a ridiculously high rate per kilowatt hour, per watt hour, I guess. And so she saved up money and bought one of those like $60 photovoltaic panels to put on the roof of her thatched hut. And it changed their lives. The light, her kids are doing better in school. She's able to do work at night. There's a little more security. There's all kinds of experiments underway in doing this. A guy at Columbia University has these little it's called shared solar, little mini grid things where people can do micropayments for just enough electricity to run the lights in their house in Tunisia. And the outsized impact of those kilowatt hours, those watt minutes, is priceless compared to putting a $40,000 solar panel on a roof in California. If I could invest that same 40 grand in 100 of these little things, or 200, knowing the outsized impact, I think it's a no-brainer. And here, just finally, I'm a communicator, so I see this change in how we communicate, and I go, oh my God. Am I okay on time? Because I've got a few more minutes, but I don't want to. Some of you have probably seen this graph. Is ITU.int, the International Telecommunications Union, charts cell phone use. It's pretty easy to read. 2000, the rich countries are blue. Year 2000, there were 700 million cell phones on the planet. 2005, 2.2 billion, and by 2005 already more than half were in developing countries. Now it's 3/4 of the world's 5.5 billion cell phones are in developing countries. So think of the kid. You heard about Khan Academy. Obviously digital divide still exists. These are not smartphones yet, but they will be very soon. So this kid can be like, listening to Khan do his little lectures any day now. And that says to me, and with Google's work on translation interfaces and that kind of thing, also says to me that we're poised for just an explosive potential for communicating, sharing and shaping ideas on a global level, from the hut in Kenya to right here. And, and I write all the time about in the classroom. I just want to close out in academia, my new home, where I went to become effective after 25 years of journalism feeling marginally effective. I have written, can 140 characters matter? I did this post on Twitter, and I say, yes, absolutely. There's a woman at University of Connecticut who teaches bird biology, Marian Rebega. And she, several years now, one of the assignments for her students is you have to get a Twitter account, and then while you're out on this semester, you have to tweet every time you witness bird behavior, bird doing something quirky. So they're tweeting bird behavior. Now, they're all done for the semester, but the hashtag was bird class. So I don't know if you'll be able to find it. You probably could Google for it easier than searching through Twitter with the hashtag. Twinslater, I don't know, I'm not going to click on it, but Twinslater is a way to tweet in multiple languages. You can do as you type, it converts into Chinese and it goes out in 2 languages. All kinds of tools like that are facilitating our ability to become much more effective at what we do. And when I talk to kids about this stuff, I say this is not just about output; it's about collaboration. One of my assignments for my students, graduate environment science students at Pace in communication, is to go out on the web, and I want you to find someone working on the same problem you're working on for your master's thesis, but in another country. And so we just started this as an experiment. They haven't, through social networks, through Facebook, through whatever, find somebody doing what you do and trade ideas. And I think we've just begun to sort of test the potential for doing that kind of thing. And I've Match.com, which you've heard me yell about here too. And there's some wonderful experiments underway. NYU has explainer.net. In journalism, explainer is shorthand for after a big earthquake or what happened in the nuclear plant, you do the explanatory graphic or the explanatory story that accompanies the news. And they did this really creative video on fracking that feels like it's anti-fracking, but actually it's just a bunch of information packaged in a way that says we need more information about this technology before it goes forward in a big way. And then there are all kinds of schools are actually doing stuff where you're learning and actually producing output at the same time. Harvey Mudd College has done regional landscaping clinics, ecologically appropriate landscaping. And there's many, many possibilities like that. There's students, these were in California somewhere, and I can't remember where, and I'm going to skip clicking on it, but they did a really great video on geoengineering that's hilarious. It's kind of like Charlie Chaplin-esque. It's wonderful. Finally, and we talked about this a lot here, science as story. Making sure that young people somehow working in a patient, methodical way towards shifting our norms for how we teach, and making sure teachers and students have access to scenarios, to learning modes that can get them to have that aha moment. And here's one. That was my wife in the background. So what that is I'm sure you've probably heard, or maybe you did when you were a kid, there's sort of a competition where you get a certain amount of balsa wood and you build a bridge in a team, and you add weight until it breaks, and then you do an analysis of what happened, what went wrong, and how you would build it differently. And what my wife, when she was a science teacher until 2 years ago, and Mike Topchick, thanks to Mike, they built into this fairly conventional setup a cost-benefit component where the kids had a budget. They had to buy their balsa wood with imaginary dollars. And they were graded on performance, both performance and economy. So that the cost-benefit ratio is something they learned. And look at, did you get that whoa moment there? And I mean, this is engaging. They will not forget that. I don't know if they've done a follow-up study to see how many of these kids went on to become engineers, or at least to be literate about, cost benefit. Breaking things to learn is something I wrote about on my blog. Learning by breaking things. We have to get over the fact that failure is a wonderful thing. If there's constructive failure, how do you teach that? Finding ways to make that happen. And in the way we communicate it as well, I think there's great potential. And so, and then stepping back is useful. Stepping back periodically and it's okay to be emotional about the power of the things we've learned about the world through science. Now, there's a line between having a religious reaction, this is the Carl Sagan, this is the pixel, that's Earth, that deep shot from one of the Voyagers just before it left the solar system. There's power in this stuff. And a couple of years ago when we had the 40th anniversary of Earthrise, I had found that the Japanese Space Agency had done this amazing video there was a video version of the Earthrise photograph. I'm sure you all know the photo from Apollo 8. And the video version, they had a spacecraft that went around the back end of the moon and did a HD video. So, and I got in touch with Andy Chaikin, who wrote what I consider the definitive book on the Apollo program. He happened to be a college classmate of mine. And he had this really beautifully rendered version of the audio conversation they had in the spaceship, in the craft. And so I put it all together with some music from one of my bandmates. And this is what came out the other end.
All right, we're going to roll. Oh, my God, look at that picture over there. There's the Earth coming up. Wow, that's pretty. Hey, don't take that. It's not scheduled.
Don't take that. That's not scheduled. That's really, there's something interesting. So this is what's really cool about it. don't know why this wasn't on the. I don't watch the nightly news anymore. Does anyone? But I don't recall this imagery being out and around in 2007 when these images were taken. And the Earth rise is really spectacular, but the Earth set, we'll see in a second, is even more so. This is on YouTube, of course. YouTube.com/Revkin. So again, you know, the sky's the limit, literally. I think there's, but of course it takes collaboration and the ability to sort of jump out of foxholes. So thank you very much.